There's a ring in my jewelry box that I haven't worn in 6 years. Gold band, thin, a little scratched on the inside where the engraving used to be sharp. It says, Forever H. I used to touch that engraving every morning like a prayer. Now I can't even open the box without my hands going cold. Not because I miss him. I do, in a way. But that's not why my hands go cold. They go cold because that ring is a lie. A 45-year lie that fit perfectly on my finger, and I never once thought to question it. My name is Cecily. I'm 91 years old. And I'm going to tell you what happened at my husband's funeral, because I think someone needs to hear it. Not the version I told my children. Not the version I told my pastor. The real one. The one that starts with a woman I'd never met walking up to me at the graveside and saying 4 words that burned my entire life to the ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. I married Harold Allen Merrow in the spring of 1957. I was 22. He was 26. He had hands that could fix anything. A leaking pipe, a broken radio, a chair with a wobbly leg. I thought if a man could fix that many things, he must be steady, dependable, the kind of man who stays. And he did stay. That's the thing people don't understand when I tell this story. He stayed for 45 years. He was there every Christmas morning. He carved the turkey. He drove the children to school when it rained. He painted the porch every 3 years without being asked. He stayed. But staying and being faithful are not the same thing. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Our marriage was, well, let me think about how to say this honestly. It was warm, not hot. I don't mean that in the way young people mean it. I mean there was a steadiness to us like a wood stove that never quite goes out, but never really roars either. We had 4 children, Margaret, Harold Jr., David, and little Susan, who's 63 now, so I suppose. Little doesn't apply anymore, but she'll always be the baby to me. We raised them in a house on Elm Street in a town that doesn't matter to you, so I won't name it. What matters is that it was small. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a yard that Harold kept trimmed like it was a golf course, which was the one vanity I allowed him without complaint. I cooked. Every single night for 45 years, I cooked. I don't say that for pity. I say it because I want you to understand the rhythm of our life. I knew what that man ate for dinner every Tuesday. I knew how he liked his eggs. I knew the exact sound of his footsteps coming up the back stairs, and I could tell by the weight of those steps whether he'd had a good day or a bad one. I knew him, or I thought I did. I thought knowing someone's footsteps was the same as knowing their heart. I was wrong about that. Harold died on a Wednesday in October, 2018. He was 71, heart attack. The kind that doesn't give you a warning, just takes you mid-sentence. He was in the garage fixing something. I don't even remember what. Margaret found him. She called me, and I remember her voice on the phone sounding like a child's, even though she was 40 by then. "Mom," she said, "Mom, you need to come." That's all. And I knew. The funeral was on Saturday. Beautiful day. The kind of October day where the sky is so blue it almost hurts, and the leaves are turning, and everything looks like it's on fire in the most peaceful way. I remember thinking, the world has no business being this pretty today. Harold is in a box, and the maples are showing off. It felt rude. The church was full. Harold was liked, not loved exactly, not by people outside the family, but liked. He was the kind of man people called reliable. They said it at the service. You could always count on Harold. Harold was a man of his word. Harold never let anyone down. I sat in the front pew and listened to people describe a man I recognized, and I nodded and I held Margaret's hand, and I thought, yes, that's him. That's my Harold. The burial was at Greenwood Cemetery just outside of town, small. The pastor said a few words. David cried quietly. Susan stared at the ground like she was angry at it. Harold Jr. stood behind me with his hand on my shoulder, and I could feel him trembling, trying to be the man of the family now at 42, when he still looked 12 to me. And then it was over. People started drifting away the way they do, slowly, in groups of 2 or 3, murmuring to each other, glancing back at me with that look people give widows, that mixture of pity and relief that it's not them. I was standing near the grave, just standing. I wasn't ready to leave yet. I wanted one more minute, just one more minute near the box that held the man who made my coffee every morning for 45 years without being asked. That's when she appeared. She was younger than me, maybe 60, 65. Blonde hair, going silver, nicely dressed, not flashy. She had a face that might have been beautiful once and was now just composed, carefully composed. She was holding a single white rose, and she was standing about 20 feet away, watching. I thought she was a neighbor, a coworker's wife, someone from his bowling league. I almost smiled at her. Then she walked toward me, and she said, "I'll never forget this, not if I live to be 100. She said, "I loved him too." 4 words. That's all it takes to end a world. I didn't respond. I want you to know that. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't slap her. I stood there in my black dress, my sensible black shoes, my widow's hat that I'd bought at a department store the day before because I didn't own one. And I looked at this woman, and something inside me went very, very quiet. Not numb. Quiet. The way a house goes quiet right before a storm breaks every window. She must have seen something in my face because she took a step back. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have come. I needed to see where he'd be. I needed to say goodbye." I said, "How long?" She looked at the ground, then at me. 23 years, she said. 23 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 23 years. That means it started when I was 45, when David was in high school, when I was making meatloaf on Tuesdays and ironing Harold's shirts on Sunday nights, and lying next to him in our bed, in our house, under our roof, while part of him was somewhere else, with someone else, half our marriage, half. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, a parallel life that ran alongside mine for 23 years, and I never knew. I never even suspected, and I don't know which part is worse, that he did it or that I didn't see it. Because what does that say about me? What does it say about a woman who shares a bed with a man for decades and doesn't notice that half his heart's missing? Her name was Diane. I found that out later. Diane Kessler. She lived 2 towns over. She was a piano teacher, divorced. She had a son from her first marriage, a boy named Thomas, who, according to what I eventually pieced together, called my husband Uncle Hal. Uncle Hal. As if that were a real thing. As if my husband had a right to that name. I didn't scream at her by the grave. I want you to understand that. I didn't make a scene. My children were 50 feet away, getting into cars, checking their phones, blowing their noses. They didn't see her. They didn't hear her. And I I did the thing I had been trained to do since I was a girl. I held myself together. I smiled, or something close to it, and I said, "You should go now." And she did. She set the white rose on the edge of the grave and walked away. And I watched her get into a blue sedan. And I watched the sedan pull out of the cemetery. And I stood there with my husband underground and a stranger's flower on his. Dirt, and the sky was still blue, and the maples were still burning, and nothing was what I thought it was. You know, I spent a long time after that moment trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand how a woman lives inside a lie that long without seeing it. And I realized it wasn't just about Harold. It was about me, about all the questions I never asked because I was afraid the answers would ruin the only life I knew how to live. I wrote some of what I learned down eventually, the things I wish someone had told me when the ground opened up beneath me. If you're going through something like this, something that makes you question everything you thought you knew, I left something in the first comment below this video. It's not much, but it's honest, and that's more than I got. The drive home from the cemetery was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Margaret drove. She kept looking at me in the rearview mirror, and I kept my face still. I've spent a lifetime keeping my face still. Women of my generation, we were trained in it. Smile when you're dying. Nod when you're screaming. Serve dinner when you want to throw the plates against the wall. I went home. I walked into that kitchen where I'd cooked 10,000 meals. I sat at the table, and I didn't move for 3 hours. Margaret came to check on me at some point. "Mom, do you want tea?" "No." "Mom, do you want to lie down?" "No." She thought I was grieving, and I was, but not the way she thought. I was grieving the person I'd been that morning. The loyal wife, the steady woman, the one who knew her husband. That person was dead now too. She just didn't have a casket. I didn't tell the children, not then. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't to protect Harold's memory. I didn't care about that anymore. It was pride. 45 years of marriage, and I didn't know? My children would look at me differently. They'd pity me, and I had spent my entire life making sure nobody pitied Cecily Merrill, so I carried it. The way I carried everything, alone in silence, like a stone in my pocket that got heavier every day. But something else was happening inside me, something I didn't expect. It wasn't just grief, and it wasn't just anger. It was clarity, a terrible, cold, bright clarity, like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were in. I started seeing our entire marriage differently. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every Saturday when he went fishing with Earl. I don't even know if Earl was real. Every time he came home smelling like soap, freshly showered at the gym, he said, and I'd think, how considerate. He doesn't come home sweaty. And now I knew what that soap was really washing off. The memories kept rearranging themselves, like someone had picked up the photo album of my life and shaken it, and all the pictures fell out in a different order. And now they told a completely different story. There was a night, I must have been 50, maybe 51, when Harold came home with a silk scarf, pale blue. He said he'd seen it in a shop window and thought of me. I wore it every Sunday to church for 3 years. And now I wondered, did he buy two? One for me and one for her? Or was I the afterthought? Was the first scarf always hers? I'll never know. That's the cruelest part of being betrayed by a dead man. You can't confront him. You can't scream at him across the kitchen table at midnight. You can't watch his face when he realizes he's been caught. He just escapes into the ground, into silence, into a version of history that I can't correct, because the only other witness is a woman named Diane, who I never want to see again. For the first 2 months after the funeral, I barely left the house. The children thought I was mourning. In a way, I was. But I was also searching. I went through everything, every drawer, every coat pocket, every shoebox on the top shelf of the closet. And I found things, not a lot. Harold was careful, I'll give him that. But careful people make mistakes when they have 23 years to make them. I found a receipt from a restaurant I'd never been to, dated 1994. Table for two. I found a birthday card, not in my handwriting, not in any of the children's handwriting, that said, "To the man who makes Tuesdays bearable." Tuesdays. He told me Tuesdays were his late nights at the firm. I found a photograph, small, tucked inside a book on the top shelf. A book he knew I'd never open because it was about woodworking, and I couldn't care less about woodworking. The photograph was of Diane, younger, smiling, standing in a garden I didn't recognize. Every discovery was a small death. I'm not being dramatic. I mean it literally. Something inside me died with each one. The wife who believed, the woman who trusted, the partner who thought forever meant something. I burned the card. I burned the receipt. But I kept the photograph. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to look at the woman who had what I thought was mine. Maybe because I wanted to understand what she had that I didn't. She was pretty in that photograph, not prettier than me. I was pretty too once, though no one tells you that after 60. But she looked free. She looked like a woman who didn't have to cook dinner for 4 children and iron shirts and smile at church and pretend that her life was everything she'd dreamed of. And I hated her. God, I hated her. Not the polite kind of dislike. Real, bone-deep, teeth-clenching hatred. The kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and sits on your chest like a cat that won't move. But here's what nobody tells you about hatred. It gets boring. After a while, it's just exhausting. It takes so much energy to hate someone. And at my age, energy is a limited resource. I had to choose what to spend it on. So I stopped hating Diane. Not because I forgave her. I didn't. I haven't. But because hating her was costing me more than it was costing her. She didn't know I lay awake at night. She didn't know I imagined their conversations, their dinners, their mornings. My hatred was a bonfire in an empty field, and nobody was warming their hands on it but me. If this is hitting close to home, if you know what it's like to carry something like this, check the pinned comment. I left something there for you. Now, the revenge. You're waiting for it. I know you are, because I would be too. When a woman my age says revenge, people expect something dramatic. Poison in the coffee, a public shaming, selling the house, and moving to Italy. I've seen those movies. That's not what happened. My revenge was quieter than that, and I think it was worse. 3 months after the funeral, I drove to Diane's town. I didn't tell anyone. I got in my car, a white Buick that Harold had insisted on buying because he said Buicks were solid. And I drove 32 miles to a town called Ashfield, and I parked on her street, and I sat in the car for 45 minutes. Her house was yellow, small, flower boxes in the windows. A piano, I could see it through the front window. She came out at one point to get the mail. She was wearing a green sweater. She looked ordinary, not like a villain. Just a woman getting her mail. I almost drove away. But then she looked up and saw my car, and something in her face changed. She recognized the Buick maybe, or maybe she just felt it. The way you feel someone watching you from across a room. I got out of the car. She stood on her porch. I stood on the sidewalk, and for a long moment, we just looked at each other. Two women on either side of a dead man's lie. I didn't come to yell at you, I said. She nodded slowly. I came to ask you one question. She waited. Did he tell you about me? She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were wet. Yes, she said. He told me everything. He told me about you and the children and the house and everything. He said he loved you. He said he couldn't leave. And you accepted that? I accepted whatever he gave me, she said. I know that makes me a fool. It makes us both fools, I said. And then, and this is the part that surprises even me, we talked, not on the porch. She invited me inside, and I went. I sat in Diane Kessler's living room, in a chair that my husband might have sat in 100 times, and I drank tea from a cup that his lips might have touched, and we talked for 2 hours. She told me things I didn't want to hear, that he was gentle with her, that he remembered her birthday, that he called her every Tuesday and Thursday, Tuesdays, always Tuesdays, and that when he didn't call, she knew something was wrong. She told me about the time he fixed her front steps without being asked, and I almost laughed because of course he did. He fixed everything for everyone. That was his love language, and apparently it wasn't exclusive. But she also told me things I needed to hear, that he talked about me with admiration, that he said I was the strongest person he knew, that he called me his anchor, which would be flattering if it didn't also mean I was the thing that kept him from drifting to where he actually wanted to be. I mentioned something earlier in the first comment below. It's still there if you need it. The thing about that conversation, and the thing I've turned over in my mind 1,000 times since, is that Diane was not what I expected. She wasn't cold. She wasn't scheming. She was lonely. She'd been divorced for 30 years. She had a son who moved to California and called once a month. She had her piano students and her garden and her Tuesday phone calls from a married man who would never leave his wife. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. I think it makes it human, and that's the hardest thing to accept, that the worst betrayal of your life wasn't committed by a monster. It was committed by two ordinary people who were lonely and selfish and human, and one of them happened to be the man who made your coffee every morning for 45 years. I left Diane's house that afternoon and drove home. The sun was setting and the highway was empty, and I cried. Not the dignified widow's tears I'd been performing for 3 months. Real crying, the ugly kind. The kind where your whole face changes shape and you have to pull over because you can't see the road. I cried for Harold, not the Harold who betrayed me. The Harold I thought I had, the one who was mine. The one who existed only in my mind, it turns out, but who I loved completely. I mourned him like a second death, because that's what it was. He died twice. Once in the garage, and once in the cemetery when a woman with a white rose said 4 words that ended 45 years of certainty. Now here's where the revenge comes in, and I need you to understand I didn't plan this. It wasn't calculated. It just happened. The way all the most important things in my life have happened, without permission. 6 months after the funeral, I got a phone call from a lawyer. Harold had left a small life insurance policy. Nothing enormous, but enough. And he'd also left a savings account I didn't know about. Not a secret one, exactly, but one he'd opened in his name alone, years ago, that the bank found during the estate process. There was $42,000 in it. I have a feeling I know what that money was for. I think it was for her, for Diane, for the life he was going to live someday when... What? When I died first? When the children were old enough? When he finally found the courage? He never found the courage, and the money came to me. I took it, all of it, and I did something Harold would have hated. I spent it on myself. Now you have to understand, I had never in my life spent money on myself. Not real money. Not without guilt. I grew up in a house where women didn't spend. We saved. We mended. We made do. And in my marriage, every dollar went to the house, the children, the cars, the roof, the college funds. I bought my clothes at thrift stores. I cut coupons. I reused aluminum foil, for God's sake. Harold used to joke that I could make $1 scream for mercy before I let it go. But that money, that $42,000, that was probably meant for another woman's future. I spent it without mercy. I remodeled my kitchen. I ripped out the old cabinets that Harold had installed in 1978 and put in new ones, white ones. I got a new stove, gas, the kind I'd always wanted but Harold said was unnecessary. I got new countertops, marble, real marble. I'd never touched marble in my own home before. And then I did something else, something bigger. I traveled. I went to places Harold never wanted to go. He was a homebody, or so I thought, though. Now I realize he just didn't want to be far from Ashfield for too long. I went to Charleston. I went to New Orleans. I went to the coast of Maine and stood on the rocks and let the wind hit my face until my cheeks burned. I went alone. An 86-year-old woman alone in a hotel room in New Orleans, eating beignets for breakfast and not answering to anyone. Margaret thought I was having a breakdown. "Mom, this isn't like you." She was right. It wasn't like me. It was like the person I might have been if I hadn't spent 45 years being Harold Merrow's wife. The first comment below has something I wish I'd found sooner. Take a look when you can. David was the one I eventually told, not Margaret. Margaret worships her father's memory, and I won't take that from her. Not Harold Jr., he's too much like his father, and I don't mean that kindly. But David. David was always the quiet one, the one who watched, the one who even as a child seemed to understand that the world was more complicated than it appeared. I told him on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the new marble countertop in my remodeled kitchen. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you been carrying this, Mom?" 6 months, I said. That's too long to carry something like that alone. And I almost said, "Sweetheart, I've been carrying things alone since before you were born. This is just one more." But I didn't, because he was crying. My 58-year-old son was crying in my kitchen, and I thought, at least one of the men in this family knows how to show a woman that her pain matters. David asked me if I wanted to confront Diane publicly. I said no. He asked if I wanted to tell Margaret and Susan and Harold Jr. I said no. He asked what I wanted, and I told him the truth. I want to live whatever years I have left as myself, not as Harold's wife, not as anyone's mother or grandmother or widow, as myself. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and maybe he was, because I was seeing myself for the first time too. That was 5 years ago. No, 6 now. I lose track. The years go faster when you're not counting them against someone else's schedule. I did other things with that money. I donated some to the church. Not because I'm generous, but because it felt right to put Harold's secret money somewhere he'd have to answer for. I like to think of him, wherever he is, watching me write that check and squirming. I bought Susan a piano, which was petty, and I knew it. Every time she plays, I think of Diane and her piano students, and I smile, and the smile is sharp. And I kept a little for emergencies, for the day when Margaret finally finds out, because she will someday. And when she does, I want to be able to take her somewhere beautiful and hold her hand and tell her, your father was a human being, and human beings are capable of terrible love. That's what I've come to understand, sitting here at 91 with my new kitchen and my travel photographs, and my husband's ring in a box I never open. Love is not what I thought it was. I thought it was a contract, a promise made once and kept forever, but it isn't. It's a daily choice. And Harold chose me most days, just not all of them. And on the days he didn't choose me, he chose someone else. And both of us, Diane and I, were left building our lives on whatever pieces of him he decided to hand out that week. I won't pretend I'm at peace with it. I'm not. I'm 91, and I still wake up some nights with my fists clenched, and I reach for his side of the bed and find it empty. And I don't know if I'm reaching out of love or out of a desire to shake him until his teeth rattle. Probably both. That's marriage for you. Even after it ends, it keeps contradicting itself. But here's what I want to tell you. And I'm not going to dress it up in a bow because I'm too old for bows. My revenge was not dramatic. My revenge was not a scene in a movie. My revenge was waking up every morning and choosing to be the person Harold's lie tried to erase. The woman who deserved to know the truth. The woman who deserved marble countertops and beignets in New Orleans and the gas stove she always wanted. My revenge was living, not for him, not against him, just living on my own terms. For the first time in 45 years. Some things are easier to read than to hear. I put something in the pinned comment for when you're ready. People ask me, well, David asks me because he's the only one who knows, do you regret the marriage? And I tell him what I'll tell you. I don't regret the marriage. I regret the lie. Those are different things. The marriage gave me Margaret and Harold Jr. and David and Susan. It gave me a kitchen to cook in, and a porch to sit on, and a man who made my coffee every morning. The lie took those things and put a crack in them, but a cracked thing can still be beautiful. It's just not what you thought it was. My mother used to say, and she was a hard woman, my mother, a woman who ironed sheets and thought crying was for funerals and onions. She used to say, Cecily, a woman's life is mostly endurance. The trick is to endure without turning to stone. I spent 45 years enduring, and I did turn to stone a little. In the places where Harold's lie lived, I turned hard and smooth and cold. But the rest of me, the parts he didn't touch with his deception, those parts are still soft, still warm, still capable of laughing at terrible things and crying at beautiful ones and eating beignets alone in New Orleans and feeling for the first time in my life like myself. I'm 91. I won't pretend I have years ahead of me. I might not have months, but whatever I have, it's mine. Not Harold's, not Diane's, not anyone's. Mine. And if that's not revenge, I don't know what is. I still have the ring. I told you that. Gold band, thin, scratched on the inside. Forever, H. I keep it in the box. I don't wear it. I don't throw it away. It's the truest thing I own, because it holds both the promise and the betrayal in one small circle of gold. It's everything my marriage was. Something that looked whole from the outside and was cracked from within. Some nights I open the box. I don't put the ring on. I just look at it, and I think about Diane in her yellow house, and I think about Harold in his grave, and I think about myself, this old woman with new countertops and shaking hands and a story she never planned to tell. And I close the box, and I go to sleep. And tomorrow I'll wake up, and the coffee won't be made, because the man who made it is gone, and I'll make it myself, the way I should have been making it all along.